Okay, I'm going to give this a shot. This is a legislative testimony presentation for House Bill 3944, the Police Camera Act of 2017. The group offering testimony is a hypothetical nonprofit. We're going to call it Let's All Not Get Shot, or LINGS. I'm representing that group, Ed Peacock. Appreciate the committee for hearing our comments today. Appreciate your valuable time. Police excessive use of force, skewed predominantly toward people of color, is one of the top civil rights issues facing the U.S. today. Seems that every other day we hear a fresh news story about a police shooting, or exoneration of an officer just after obviously racially biased use of excessive force. Minority communities are just about fed up with the government's inability to stop these acts of otherwise well-trained and functional officers. Even more so, we're tired of the aftermath of rationalizations and vilification of our minority communities and the closed ranks of law enforcement. We want transparency and accountability, and this bill is just one step towards that goal. So what does this bill provide? Mainly it provides money with some strings attached. Bill provides dollars and grant funding to law enforcement, and basically for these cameras. And the responsibilities that it comes with are mainly to develop the policies that would make these cameras more palatable to the civil rights organizations that have been more cautious about endorsing the cameras. Many of them agree in principle, but not without some specific policies and procedures in place that prevent abuses of the cameras by law enforcement. This bill endorses those types of policies and procedures and builds their development into stipulations for the law enforcement agencies to receive funds from law. So what do the cameras provide? So the body cameras seem like they're a new thing, but they've really been pretty intensely studied in a short amount of time. Although new reports are being issued all the time, the vast majority of them indicate that the cameras cut department costs by reducing complaints and speeding resolution of complaints, and increasing the complaints that could be thrown out. At least one recent study in Las Vegas showed a net annual savings of around $3,000 per user per year, making a benefit to cost ratio about 2.6 to 3.8 when the Office of Management budget is usually happy with about a 1 or a break-even point. But there's more that's provided by these cameras than just the capital and operating cost benefit. The non-quantifiable benefits or intangibles include an increased police accountability, transparency, and legitimacy, improved citizen behavior and actions toward police, reduced conflict between officers, and assistance in cases like domestic violence with reluctant victims, as the video footage often provides an immediate after-the-fact account of the event. So what's delivered from law enforcement in return for this money? What are the strings that are attached? The way the bill's crafted, before the officer can even strap on the cameras or use them in the field, a lot of work has to be done in the office and in the community. There's policies and procedures and protocols that have to be developed. these have to be developed with community input and be made available to the public. There's rules to be developed, a set of statistical data to be collected along the way, a training toolkit to develop, and in the end, an endpoint study to contribute to and for the government to complete. In this way, the expenditure is self-documenting. Its methods are vetted in the community, and its performance measures are developed and collected as part of the contract for receipt of funds. And the data for the evaluation of the endeavor is built into the project. So one of the things that the law enforcement agencies have to develop are these policies. So what do they entail? These deliverables include policies and procedures for safe and effective use of the cameras, for secure storage of the data, for protecting the privacy rights of individuals, for release of any recorded data in accordance with the open records laws, for making data available to the prosecutors, defense, and officers of the court, and procedures for periodic evaluations of the storage and handling of data. So the data collection and retention protocol that has to be developed as some specific things that civil rights groups like the ACLU has brought up in terms of privacy issues and potentials for abuses. And so this law incorporated some of those things into its minimum requirements. The statistical data that is required to be collected is sort of an equalizing factor, so that they're gathering all of the data from all of the grantees for these projects, so they can have a consistent set to study. They're getting the breakdown that they didn't have before, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, age. They're getting finer grain that they can use to answer some of the questions that they couldn't answer before. So you may notice the training toolkit also required that it may seem redundant with the toolkit that was required in 2015 under executive order by President Obama, but it will expand upon that one that is already up on the internet. You can access that one now. At the end of the 2 years, there is an extensive endpoint study that is outlined in the law. So I kind of glossed over some of the benefits of the camera, body cameras in themselves, because you're probably going to hear that a lot. I wanted to just touch briefly on some of the lack of merit in some of the alternatives and some of the detractions that may have come up. Recently, I guess some of the newer studies have caused some people to doubt the evidence that shows the benefits of some of the cameras. I know the ACLU had modified some of their positions on body cameras, but there's always going to be, especially in social sciences, some conflicting and anomalous results and studies. The study design is important, the location and community makeup and history is important. All of these things have to be taken into account when we consider new data. That's really why many of the agencies that you work with make use of a weight of evidence approach. It's more like a quacks like a duck approach. If a bird looks like a duck, has a bill like a duck, swims like a duck, flies like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's most likely like a duck. Well, if the preponderance of previous studies have shown police body cameras to be an effective deterrent against discriminatory excess use of police force, then the weight of evidence is in favor of that conclusion. So recent conflicting evidence shouldn't sway the body of opinion. The second, I guess, alternative opinion would be that the cost of cameras prohibits using a different alternative strategies to reduce police violence. This brings us back to the cost issue that we talked about before. It's not a mutually exclusive proposition. We talked about the savings that could be had. Eventually they'll make up the difference in the initial expenditures for the cameras. Naturally, we shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket in trying to reduce the police violence. Body cameras aren't a panacea for the problem, and basically looking at the other measures that have been suggested, it definitely has its place. The body cameras have a very big place in the strategies that have been suggested. Training seems to be the first thing that's always discussed. This training officers and de-escalation techniques and making those techniques so ingrained as to come naturally. Training officers in their own and the citizens' explicit or implicit biases and how they may influence interactions, causing misunderstandings or triggering conflicts. However, this may not be as effective given that it mainly teaches us to recognize biases rather than changing biases. That may take a little bit more work, according to Scientific American, that hasn't been researched sufficiently yet. Training in the use of force as a last resort, and training to use it only to the extent necessary is another need. Some training may be redundant, but it may need to be approached in a slightly different angle. The main point is that most of the training is available, it just needs to be emphasized. Bundling that training with the new training for camera usage might save some money. The current training is heavily weighted toward firearms training, self-defense training, and physical fitness training. We might be able to get efficiencies on those classes through modernizing some of those methods that might allow some balance with the new training that we need in these other areas. Another solution that's mentioned is recruiting diversity and trying to make the force resemble the community and diversity makeup. Another method that's been suggested for a while is to increase the recruitment of women on the force, because statistics undeniably favor that there are lower complaints of excess force, lower sustained allegations, and lower civil liability payouts when you have more women on the force. And of course, achieving that is going to be difficult, and achieving the diversity percentages that resemble the community may be more difficult. And so that can take place concurrently with the body cameras strategy. There usually is the argument with that we shouldn't be buying the cameras without having a consistent set of policies and procedures. But this seems more like the Holy Grail, in that by the time we reach agreement on something like that, or it's imposed by Congress, that could take many years or could never be agreed on. There's no universal set of body camera policies. Each coalition seems to have their own. There may be a minimum must-haves. There was a group of 30-odd different organizations that developed a People's Manifesto that had a group of policies that were necessary. I think even the National Association of Social Workers was one of them. ACLU has a model legislation that's into version 2.1 now. If Congress were going to take this up and have DOJ develop rules for the nation, that would probably solve the problem, but until they do, probably the best course of action is what we have in this rule, which is a minimum set of standards, and let communities work out local standards in addition to those. The last case is probably the hardest to deal with, just a what if paranoia. People are worried that body cameras would be used to link to facial recognition programs and tracking individuals, and used for surveillance, and that this would lead to even wider targeting of people that may have complained against the police. And if you take this attitude, that leads you basically back to a no action alternative, and back to the status quo, which is not making any progress toward reducing police excessive use of force. So in conclusion, we recommend that no stone be left unturned in finding solutions to the current state of affairs, and that we endorse this legislation because, especially due to its forethought in developing policies with input from the community and collecting data to be used in evaluating the program. And I think the only change that we would make would be that it would be more honest in its presentation, in that nowhere in the legislation are the words race or minority used explicitly. It's just about as sanitized as it can be, which is somewhat disturbing that we can't have more of an open conversation about this problem. It's hard to make a case for a bill that benefits a specific population when the language to support that case is not present in the bill. But we would like to offer any assistance we can be. We have some trained facilitators on our staff should the department need any assistance in community input programs with the grant recipients. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.